harvest continues, I guess. As you can see from the title, I'm going to be harvesting a lot today of what's left in the garden. And each time that I harvest something, I'll show you what I get and explain what I plan to do with it. And also, as it says in the title, I'm going to be making Chow Chow, green tomato Chow Chow. And I thought I had a video out there of making it. If I do, someone please show it to me. I don't know, I have 860 some videos or something now, but they're also in categories, and I've gone through my videos in my cooking demonstration category and I can't find it. So perhaps I'm thinking about a couple of times that I've made a couple of different kinds of hot pepper relish. I thought I also demonstrated the Chow Chow. The Chow Chow, green tomato Chow Chow recipe comes from my mother, who I'm sure got it from her mother. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if my grandmother got it from my great-grandmother. It's been passed down through the family for years, and it's a favorite thing to eat with fish dinners. Dried fish dinner in particular, but any fish dinner. It's a very good relish. So I will, I guess, tack on to the end of this, making of my green tomato Chow Chow. So let's get on and have a look at what's coming out of the garden today. This is a mixture of the San Marzano and some beaver lodge down below. San Marzanos, I don't know if I'm pleased with them or not. I've had a couple that I've eaten, like in sandwiches, and they are a very meaty tomato. Also, I think kind of dry, so I don't know what they'll can like. It's supposed to be a wonderful one for making canned sauces and whatever. What I'm going to do is just can whole tomatoes, or tomatoes cut in half. I'll remove the skin first by putting them in boiling water for a minute and then shocking them in ice water. They're easy to peel. So this will only make a few jars, I'm sure, but down below there's a layer of the beaver lodge, and they really produce well. Next I'll be picking the green ones that I use in the green tomato Chow Chow. And there are a number of these tomatoes, and the I can't think of what it's called, the third variety that I'm growing. Anyway, there are a number of them that are just partially ripe, and I'll leave those to ripen to have as fresh tomatoes. This one isn't really ripe, and neither is this one, but just touching the plant and it fell off. So there is the ripe tomatoes harvested anyway. Well, there is my haul of green tomatoes, and that's certainly enough to make the green tomato Chow Chow with. And I finally remembered the name of the other determinate variety, and this is some of them here, called Sash's Alte. They're larger than the Beaver Lodge, but nowhere near as prolific. Incredible the amount of fruit that the Beaver Lodge plants have put out. I've had some of these both to eat ripe, and I like them both equally well as far as flavor goes. And these ones, I wish Beaver Lodge grew that size, but for me they didn't anyway. I think that what I wanted to add, yes, I'm just remembering now what it was I wanted to add to this clip. For the things that I'm going to be making and talking about as I do the harvest here, that I'm not putting in this video, the making of them, I'll put the link down below, because I've previously done videos on that topic, so I'll put the link down below for anybody that would like to have a look at how it's actually made after I've talked about it. Well, that's the last of the cucumbers. There are 2 or 3 quite small ones on the vines, but the vines are not looking great, so whether they either develop into anything or not, I don't know. But the cucumbers will also be used in the Chow Chow relish. So there is the cucumber harvest. The phlox is starting to finish, maybe because of the hot, dry weather, I guess. But what I'm looking at is very strange. All I ever had here was white. It's growing up in amongst a Weigelia bush, which at first I thought was a dumb idea, but no, it supports it so that it doesn't get a chance to fall over. All white, except for this year, I have this one. Pink or mauve or whatever you want to call it. It's more pink now than mauve, I guess. It was sort of a mauve color when it first bloomed out. But where did that come from? I've never had that color. I don't know. A seed from one of the other from one of the white that got cross-pollinated with something. Very strange. It's a pretty color. I hope more of it comes up next year, but that's the first time I've ever seen that color in the garden. Well, that last clip I took on the way out here to harvest my beets. I've been fascinated by that different colored phlox now for a week or 10 days, so I had to share it. I have no idea where it came from. I've been standing here at this bench cutting the greens off and the roots off of the root ends off of my beets. 20 minutes, half hour. And I don't know, I have enough there for 7 or 8 pint jars, I think, of pickled beets. The beets, the way we pickle them here, they're sweet pickled beets. I've seen them, other people in other places do them with no sugar involved, and we like ours sweet and spicy, not hot, but there's pickling spice and whatever, cloves I think also in them. They're very good. Again, it's a recipe that I have in my mother's little handwritten cookbook. I'm sure she got it from her mother. I've been standing here, like I say, for 20 minutes, maybe a half hour doing this. Unfortunately, couldn't salvage any of the greens, or I could have picked through them, got a bit, but they're kind of old and tough, and a lot of them are full of holes where slugs or something have attacked them. But as I've been standing here, and this area is very close to the trees, I have been hearing something. Every time there's a breeze, you'd almost think there was something coming through the trees. And what it is the little light breeze today is knocking off a lot of the old dead leaves that are on these trees because of the drought. It's just amazing. It's just a constant rustling, tingling sound of the leaves falling down, and this is only the 7th of September. We were supposed to get rain yesterday. Showers and a possible thunder shower. We didn't get a single sprinkle. Well, I'll take my beets in the house, I guess, and that will be probably the end of harvesting for today. I still have my plums to bring in, but I'm going to wait another day or so on the plums. They're quite ripe, but I'd like them to be a little softer than they are. And then, of course, there is the turnips, which will be sometime in late October before I see if I've got any turnips worth talking about. So today we'll end with the beets, I guess. And something that I didn't mention and meant to, the problem that I had with the potatoes out here in the straw and the voles or moles or whatever destroying them, I usually have the same problem with my beets, and I didn't have a single beet this year that was touched, so thankful for that, I guess. Even though they're inside the hoop house, I always had the problem. And they're just the other side of, well, not a wall, but they're just the other side of the area where the potatoes were. So I kept thinking when I pull these up, I'm going to find some that I pull just the top and get half a beet, but no damage at all by the voles. Well, it's only 24 hours later, but I've decided to pick the plums. They're getting soft enough. I've eaten a few. They are quite sweet. They're not huge, as you can see. I need 2 pounds minus the stones in the center to make a batch of jam. But I'm picking them now because there are a number of them on the ground, and those are the ones that are spoiled usually. There's been, like this one here, some kind of a creature has gone inside of it, a worm. They ripen quicker or soften up quicker, and they end up on the ground. And then you get the hornets. So I would rather pick them now when I'm not worried about being stung to death by hornets. So I'll show you what I get when I finish. Well, it was easy picking. I don't think I've been much more than 10 minutes doing that. And those are all that I could reach standing on the ground. There are more up higher that you'd need a step ladder to get to. For a few years I was keeping that tree pruned down lower so that I didn't have to do that. I think once it goes dormant this fall, I'll be cutting the top off of it and encouraging it to be a shorter tree again. But I think that will do for me. That's probably enough to make more than the one batch. But if there's only a few more needed to make a second batch, I'll go pick a few more. As I said, it takes 2 pounds to make a batch, and that makes about 2 pints. So Anyway, looking forward to having it this winter. I really like the plum jam. Didn't get any last year because the tree didn't have any plums on it. Well, I had enough tomatoes to make 4 pint jars. I'll put a link below to a video where I have done this before, but basically all you do is skin them, putting them in hot water and then shocking them in cold water, removing the skin and the core, where the stem attaches. And in each pint jar you put a tablespoon of bottled lemon juice, bottled because that's a known level of acidity rather than just using fresh lemon juice, because you could get various levels of acidity. And I add a half teaspoon of salt to each pint jar. I can them in a pressure canner, 11 pounds pressure for 25 minutes, just simply because I have a pressure canner. You can do them in a hot water bath, but it takes a long time. From the time they reach a full rolling boil, you have to can them for at least 80 minutes in a hot water bath because it is a low acid product. So there's 4 jars of canned tomatoes. Well, I just finished the second batch of plum jam, and I think earlier in the video I said that each batch was 2 pints. Well, math never was my strong point. Each batch makes 4 pints, and I had plenty to make the 2 batches and a bit left over, but not enough to make a third batch. I don't know what I'd do with a third batch anyway. 8 pints of it is nice enough for me, and it looks quite nice. I was encouraged anyway when I took the last batch out of the pot that I used to make the jam in. What was left in the pot started gelling almost immediately, so that's a good sign that it's going to set up and be a good jam. And that is the plum jam all made. I think I said earlier that I will put links below the video to other videos that I've made where I've made this plum jam and some of the other things that I'm doing in the video here. I'll do that, but I'll also try to put those in-screen things that pop up in the last 20 seconds of the video. So a picture of each one of the things that I'm making here, the jam and the beets and all that good stuff, and the tomatoes. And all you have to do is click on one of those and it'll take you to the video if you're interested in seeing the method or making it for yourself. Well, they're just out of the hot water bath, but I got 7 pint jars of pickled beets, and I used all the beets. I thought I might save some of the smaller ones and eat them fresh, but in the end I decided to do them all. The link that I will put to the recipe will be the same recipe that I've used this time. The only thing I've done differently is I used my Instant Pot to cook the beets. Had to do 2 batches, but that makes a lot easier and faster work of cooking the beets and not so much mess. You don't have to worry about it boiling over on the stove or whatever, because you only use a cup or 2 cups of water in the bottom of the Instant Pot just to make the steam. So there are the beets. They've only been out for a few minutes and I've already heard one pop. I was hoping while I was talking here I'd hear another one. Of course that won't happen. And next I'm moving on. Tomorrow I'm going to start the process of making the Chow Chow. That would be the last thing in this video. Well, I'm about to start the 2-day process of making the Chow Chow. And as I guess I've said before, it's my mother's recipe, and quite possibly my grandmother's and great-grandmother's recipe have been passed down through the family. But it's coming out of this little handwritten recipe book of my mother's. Mom's been gone many years, but she still helps me with my cooking. And I will type this out and put it below the video on YouTube. So if anybody's interested, you can make a copy of the recipe. I just want to say to start off with, though, all of the ingredients and the amounts of them, whatever, are just approximate. This doesn't get seasoned until everything has been chopped in the food processor. My mother and grandmother chopped it by hand, and then you add enough vinegar to cover it and that sort of thing, so it doesn't make any difference how much material you've got. I mean, you want a reasonable amount so you can can some of the jars, but This is the recipe, and as I read down through it, you'll find some strange measurements, pecks, etc. That's the oven beeping. I have a lot of jars in the oven sterilizing. I put them in, the oven goes to 350, and once it goes to 350 I shut it off and just let them cool down, and that's it. The clean jars are sterilized. Well, without any further ado, I'll start chopping the ingredients, and I'll tell you the amounts as I go through. I'm using a stainless steel stock pot, large one. You can use any non-reactive container. An enameled pot would be okay, as long as there are no chips or cracks in the enamel. Ceramic, anything like that would be okay, but do not use aluminum, anything made of aluminum. If you still have aluminum pots, go get them now and throw them out. They're not safe to cook anything in. Well, let's do some chopping. Okay, the recipe calls for 2 sweet green peppers and 1 hot red pepper. I can remember my mother using 2 different kinds of hot peppers. One was a fresh one that she bought, and I really don't know what the variety was. I can see it now. It was long and slender and red. Cayenne, perhaps, I'm not sure. But this is not a hot relish. The one hot chili in there didn't, I don't think, add any heat at all, just little flecks of color here and there. And I'm not making it terribly hot either. When this starts whirring, you'll see red down around the bottom of it, I guess. But that isn't all hot chilies. I put in 2 or 3 of my espelets, which some people will argue with me and say are a hot chili. I don't find them hot at all. They're even milder than jalapeno. I put in 1 of the Thai chilies that I grow myself, which have crossed with something, probably the espelets, because they're much larger than a Thai chili. And I put in 2 or 3 of the little dried Thai chilies. And this, when you see the volume of what we're talking about here, this still won't add very much heat. Well, that's most of the green pepper and all of the red stuff in there now. Start the chopping process. I don't think I see any large pieces in there. This has certainly made things a lot easier. I'll show you in a minute the tool that my mother and grandmother used when they were making this. I'll be back after I have finished chopping the peppers and we move on to the next item, which is cabbage. As you can see, I don't bother to scrape down the food processor in between each one of these items. I'll do that when I do the final thing in there. The next item is 1 cabbage, and that's all it says, 1 cabbage. I mean, how big a cabbage? I don't know. It's a lot like the old chestnut, is how long is a string? I've chosen this one, which is, I think, fairly small as cabbages go. It's very solid and heavy, but I've got to cut it into sections and take the core out and all that sort of stuff. I've already removed the outside leaves, but it will be reduced considerably. The first bit of the cabbage, probably about 1/8 of it. Bring you back after I have finished cabbage. The next item after the cabbage is cucumbers. Well, that's after the addition of all of the cabbage, but what I want to show you is that I'm mixing it in as I go. It makes it much easier to get it all blended in together after each addition to the kettle here. If you use something to stir it up with, I'm just using the rubber spatula, because I also use that to get it out of the processor. Well, the cucumbers that I'm using are my European gherkins, the first time I have ever grown them. And I've made dill pickles out of them, and that worked out very well. They haven't been terribly prolific, but then this summer's been crazy. But if they were a cucumber that actually had seeds, I would still leave the seeds in. But these do not. They're what's called parthenocarpic, which means that they're all female blossoms. And if there isn't any other thing that they could cross-pollinate with, a different variety of cucumber or whatever, then they will not produce a seed. What you're seeing there that some people still think is seeds is the unpollinated female zygote of the cucumber. The blossom did not get fertilized, and it still produces because of it's an F1 hybrid. And a great production rate because you don't have any male blossoms that are going to waste or anything. Every blossom has a cucumber. The recipe says 12 to 15 cucumbers. I'm using around 10, I guess, of the gherkins. As I said before, I think this is just a way to use up whatever's left in the garden. And you know, you do the combination, the mixing of it any way you want in quantities, and you'll still get the same flavor of the relish. Seem to have a big piece thumping around in there. I have to go in with the next lot again, I guess. Well, I'll bring you back once I have finished the cucumbers, and we move on to the green tomatoes. Okay, tomatoes, you use half a peck. Before you go running off to Google to find out what a peck is, it's a dry measure. There are two different kinds of pecks, the American one and the imperial measure. I'm in Canada, we never used the American one. Here it was always the imperial measure, which is larger. And you know, these things, as I say, are approximations, but a half peck of green tomatoes is the next item, and that is the largest quantity of anything that goes into this. It was definitely a way of using up the green tomatoes in the garden. And I'll bring you back after I finish with my half peck of green tomatoes, and that's when it's time to start the crying. It's 2 pounds of onions. Ready to do the onions, the last vegetable to get chopped. I didn't time myself. I've been an hour and a half anyway, probably 2 hours, preparing the vegetables and chopping them using a food processor. My mother and my grandmother would have used that. I refer to it as an ulu. Our indigenous people here in Canada and probably in the US and other places used a stone implement that was sort of like that, called an ulu. Mostly the Inuit in northern Canada, I think. But one was found, was one of the stone ones, was brought up in a scallop drag off bottom here, an area along the coast called Friars Bay, a number of years ago, and it was authenticated at the museum that it was an actual ulu. They couldn't date it because there was nothing to date it to. You know, it wasn't found in an archaeological dig or anything. It came up off the ocean floor. But a large wooden bowl and that, and my mother and my grandmother, that was all they ever used. My mother would borrow it from my grandmother's when it was time to make hers in the fall. I think the large wooden bowl was probably a butter bowl used to wash the buttermilk out of the butter and to salt the butter. And it did dual purpose in the fall. You made your chow chow with it. Well, we get the onions done here. Without too much crying, and I'll show you the finished product. Well, there's everything all chopped, and later on today it will have salt added, and then it will set overnight. You finish it on day 2. I don't want to add the salt yet. It's only just noontime here now. And I'll add the salt this evening. I'll bring you back for that little clip. What I haven't been mentioning, we have a wonderful event happening today. Today is the 11th of September, and we are getting our first real rainstorm since June. We've had the occasional shower, the occasional damp day with some fog and whatever, but we're getting a real all day long gentle rainstorm, and overnight tonight there could be some at times heavy. If the predictions are correct, we'll get 25 to 30 millimeters of rain. Hope this happens many more times before winter, but I'm glad to see it happening now. It's too late for the garden. I mean, not that the garden was destroyed, but there's nothing left in my garden really to water other than the turnips, I guess. But the turnips will get watered. I won't have to carry any water to them. So I'll bring you back when I'm adding the salt, the next phase. Well, it's 6 p.m. now, so I've decided I'll add the salt. I made that little depression there so you could see that there is quite a bit of liquid already, just out of the vegetables that have been chopped. You add a half cup of pickling salt. I'm using a coarse pickling salt. Make any difference, it will all dissolve. This is sort of flaked. If you don't have pickling salt, any non-iodized salt will do. So kosher salt or a sea salt that doesn't have iodine added. Actually, this pickling salt is kosher. In order to make salt kosher, it just has to be pure. No additives of any kind. And this will set overnight, and the salt will draw out more of the liquid out of the vegetables, and all of that liquid will be drained off before we cook it. Just make sure I get it mixed in there well. Already it smells good. Doesn't have any spices or vinegar or anything added, but I think it's the onions that I smell. It smells very good. And I think that will do. So, I'll bring you back in the morning when it's time to drain and cook. Good morning, everybody. I've been draining this for some time now. This is the third and final batch to go in the colander here. I let it drain for about 20 minutes each time to make sure that I get rid of as much of the liquid as possible. And as I'm doing it, I'm putting it into a different stock pot. I didn't know if it would fit in that stock pot or not. If I can move you over here and show you what I'm talking about. That's the stock pot that I'm talking about, and has the 2/3 of it in there, I guess, so that the last bit shouldn't bring it up much more than this. The original stock pot that I was using, I knew I had a lot of material, so I went with it to begin with, but I'm glad that I'm able to switch and use this smaller one. It's a much better pot. It has a heavy bottom on it, so it's less apt to burn or anything when you're cooking the relish. The other one that I was using there is one that I use in making cheese, and it's just a thin it's a thin stainless steel pot. But it doesn't matter when I'm making cheese because I use it in a double bath like thing. I can't think what you call it, a bain-marie, that sort of thing. It goes down inside of a large canner with water in it to heat up the milk that I'm making into cheese, and so nothing burns in it. It never gets above 100 degrees Celsius. So it doesn't get anywhere near that, actually, because you never heat milk up that high. So as soon as that last batch is ready and in there, we will proceed with cooking. In the cooking process, as part of the seasoning flavoring, you need a bag of mixed pickling spice, or a sachet of mixed pickling spice. That's just a piece of muslin cheesecloth. And the mixed pickling spices is already pre-mixed. If you're in some part of the world where that isn't available, it says it contains mustard seeds, coriander seeds, bay leaves, dill seeds, fenugreek, cinnamon, ginger, allspice, red pepper, black pepper, cloves, and sunflower oil. Well, there's not much oil in there, but it looks like maybe that's what they toasted them in or something. But now I tried to make that into something that they won't be able to get out of. You could just tie it off with a piece of string as well, but I've done this in the past with some success, so I'm going to continue. This just gets put down in the liquid as it cooks to add flavor. You don't want very much of the seed to escape. None, if you can help it. I think that's pretty sturdy. So that will get poked down in, and I'll bring you back when we're ready to start cooking this. And here comes the part where I've been talking about. It doesn't really matter how much of this chopped up vegetables that you have, if you have a lesser amount, because when it comes time to add the vinegar that's going to be cooked in, you just add enough until it's covered with vinegar. So if it was a lesser amount, you would add less vinegar, obviously, I guess. I've already added some vinegar. One container of vinegar ran out, so this is my second one. And it can be a bit, just make sure that you are actually covering it, because sometimes the vinegar isn't settling down in there. As it did there, it's not really covered with vinegar yet. And I'm using apple cider vinegar. I do use white vinegar. I used it in making my dill pickles and my hot pepper relish this year. But neither my mother or my grandmother would ever have had white vinegar in the house. As far as they were concerned, the only vinegar was apple cider vinegar. I'm old enough that I remember as a child being sent up the road to the small local general store with my mother's 1-gallon glass bottle to buy vinegar. And the lady in the store took the bottle and went over to a large wooden barrel that had a spigot on it and filled it with apple cider vinegar out of the barrel. That dates me just a bit. For this, I wouldn't use anything else but apple cider vinegar. I think we're getting close enough there to saying that it's covered, I guess. I've already added the spice bag. I can find it down here for you. There it is, showing up. And now you add sugar. 2 cups of white sugar and 2 cups of brown sugar. And my mother's handwritten recipe says you may need to add more. My mother liked things sweeter than I do. This is usually all that I add. You can taste it, and if it's too sour for you, you add more sugar. But by the time this cooks in, I like it to have a little hint of sourness in the background. And that, 4 cups of sugar in ever how much it is I've got here is quite a bit of sugar, but it will still have quite a vinegar hit to it when you get it all cooked up. Well, as it heats and I continue to stir it, that sugar will mix in completely. I'll now take it over, put it on the stove, and you cook until it is translucent, or tender, as my mother said in the recipe. So, if I can find a bigger piece like that when I'm looking for it later on, if that piece is nice and tender, then I would say it's ready and start putting it in the jars. But it takes, I don't know, probably won't remember to time this, but usually it takes about an hour to get it up to the right temperature and cooked. But I'll show you what it looks like when it's steaming away on the stove. Well, it's been on the stove now for, I didn't really time it, but 20 minutes or so, I would say. I just started to see the first whiffs of steam come up out of it. Whether that's picking up on the video or not, I don't know. And the pinky finger test. You can only keep your finger in there for 5 or 6 seconds. It's nowhere near boiling yet. I don't want it to come to a full rolling boil, but I do want it to come to a good simmer, close to a full rolling boil. It'll be nice and hot when it goes in the jars. But as you can see, it has started to change color. It's becoming more translucent. spice bag is way down in there somewhere. I keep stirring and it keeps getting lower down, but that's good. Spreading the flavor from the pickling spices. I'll bring you back when it really gets to the point where I think it's cooked. I guess you can see that it has started to bubble around the edges. So I'll let it go a few more minutes and I'll stir much more frequently. It's a lovely heavy bottom pot though, it shouldn't stick or anything. And there's quite a bit of liquid there too, it's not going to stick or burn on the bottom. But I'm very close to being ready to put it in the jars, but you want the whole mass of it to be very hot when you do that. So another 2 or 3 minutes and I'll be putting it in the bottles. I'll bring you back for that. Well, I'm ready to start putting it in bottles. I found the spice bag. Remove that. And I will leave the heat on, but on its very lowest setting, just to make sure that it's always nice and hot going in the jars. And this gas stove, the very lowest setting, is a very low setting, but we'll keep it from cooling off. Make sure I mix all of that last bit of flavor that came out of the spice bag. Now we'll put it in bottles. Well, I'm using 500 milliliter or pint jars, filling it to within, say, a ½ inch or so of the top, at least that much. But not going on to do another jar until you're finished with this one. Very important that the lid and the ring get put on while it is still good and hot, because I won't be doing these in a hot water bath or a pressure canner or anything like that. It's very high acid and not necessary. You could, if you're planning to do this and you don't feel that it's safe enough that you want to do it in a hot water bath. 10 minutes in a hot water bath would do the trick. But I don't feel that it's necessary because this is extremely high acid, as long as they seal. I've got the lid on tightly and I'll watch them all before I put them away. Make sure every one of them sealed. If something doesn't seal, I'll put it in the fridge and use it immediately. And I'll bring you back and show you how many jars I get when I'm finished. Well, there's the finished product. I only had 15 pint jars and I filled all of those. I had to rush off quickly and get 2 more of my larger jars, wash those and sterilize them. This is one of those jars that the glass is blue. I do not like that. Didn't realize I was getting it. I ordered them on Amazon. When they arrived, it was blue glass. That's why I don't like it. The color of the product that you put in it is always kind of weird looking through the blue glass. Now, these are starting to seal. Hopefully they will all seal. And what I said earlier, but I don't do a hot water bath, if by any chance you try this and yours don't seal, or a lot of yours don't seal, then by all means put them in a hot water bath 10 minutes after it returns to the full rolling boil, and they'll definitely seal after that. The problem being that perhaps your jars weren't warm enough and the relish cooled down before you got the lid on it, so that it didn't seal properly. So I'll keep a close eye on this. If any of them don't seal, that's what I will do. And this one here has got to be the one that I eat first, I guess. It's not quite full. It's down more than an inch from the top, 1.5 inches or so maybe. So when that cools off, I'll put that in the refrigerator to be used first. And that finishes this rather lengthy video. Thank you very much for watching, if you lasted all the way through to the end here.